Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this discussion titled Geopolitics of Conflicts, Mapping the New Lines of Fracture. My name is Julien Touret and I will be your moderator for this session. À la fin de la guerre froide, la communauté internationale espérait qu'un nouvel ordre international émerge dans lequel la paix serait universelle et durable. 35 ans plus tard, instabilité et conflits n'ont pourtant pas disparu. Ils ont changé de forme, de nouveaux acteurs sont impliqués et ils ont même regagné des régions où ils semblaient avoir disparu. Les tensions entre grandes puissances ont ressurgi. La rivalité entre les États-Unis et la Chine ne se limite ainsi pas aux dimensions militaires ou commerciales. Elle s'étend également au soft power, aux nouvelles technologies ou encore à la conquête de l'espace. La guerre en Ukraine, synonyme du retour du conflit à grande échelle sur le sol européen, oblige les dirigeants du vieux continent à se réarmer massivement. Les lignes de fracture actuelles ne sont pas seulement interétatiques. Elles sont aussi liées à l'émergence de menaces plus ou moins nouvelles, telles que le terrorisme, les cyberattaques, la désinformation, les conflits environnementaux ou encore les migrations massives. Face à ces différents enjeux, la communauté internationale s'efforce de jouer un rôle de médiateur, que ce soit dans la réconciliation entre États ou dans le règlement pacifique des différends. C'est ce qu'illustre, par exemple, la médiation chinoise entre l'Iran et l'Arabie saoudite, ou encore l'implication de la diplomatie américaine, tant vantée par le président Trump, dans les récentes négociations entre l'Arménie et l'Azerbaïdjan. Les divisions persistantes autour du conflit au Moyen-Orient ont été quelque peu estompées par la mise en œuvre d'un fragile plan de paix pour la région. Dans le même temps, les limites de la gouvernance mondiale actuelle ne sauraient être négligées. Le Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU, paralysé par le droit de veto des grandes puissances, n'a pas su prévenir les conflits majeurs ni régler, par exemple, les crises ukrainiennes et palestiniennes. De leur côté, certaines organisations régionales, comme l'Union africaine ou l'Organisation pour la sécurité et la coopération en Europe, tentent de pallier ces défaillances, mais leur efficacité reste limitée par le manque de moyens ou encore par les divergences entre États membres. Les enjeux politiques géocontemporains illustrent ainsi l'affaiblissement d'un ordre international qui semble dépassé. Ils obligent la communauté internationale à se réadapter et à proposer de nouvelles réponses aux défis actuels. Mais le pourra-t-elle ? C'est la question centrale que nous aurons au cours de cette discussion en cette fin de matinée. 8 panélistes auront non pas la tâche de nous donner la réponse définitive et unique à cette question, mais je suis convaincu qu'ils nous donneront en la matière de précieuses pistes de réflexion et peut-être même des pistes d'action et de solution. Je vous les présente. Son Excellence Miroslav Cerar, ancien Premier ministre de la Slovénie. Son Excellence Eduard Heger, ancien Premier ministre de la Slovaquie. Son Excellence André Flahaut, ancien président de l'Assemblée et ministre de la Défense de la Belgique. Son Excellence Amre Moussa, ancien secrétaire général de la Ligue arabe. Son Excellence Faris Razaïev, ministre adjoint des Affaires étrangères de l'Azerbaïdjan. Son Excellence Miro Kovač, ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères de la Croatie. Son Excellence Tomáš Petříček, ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République tchèque. Et Noémie Palfalvi, conseillère principale du directeur exécutif du Institut. So, to start our discussion, I will begin with a fairly general question for you, Mr. Cerar. Do you think that the international organizations, as we have known them for decades now, can do something meaningful regarding the major new geopolitical fractures I mentioned in my introduction?
Well, first, thank you very much for invitation, and I'm very happy to be here again. About your question, I am well aware that international organizations are under great pressure, and they are facing big challenges. And of course, it is necessary that they get reformed in a way, and that they adapt to pressing challenges of today's time. But of course, I do believe that they still need to exist. There is no better alternative right now. And of course, this growing multipolarity, all these fractures, all these conflicts in the world, actually do need a response in a form of multilateralism. I know that the multilateralism is also challenged, it is in decrease, but all these organizations must do their best to promote multilateralism as far as possible. We know that this multilateralism cannot be as it used to be, but it could be selective at least, because there are major powers who still need some multilateralism, and we can use this instrumental approach to support multilateralism in these spheres. And of course, multilateralism also enables cooperation in less politicized areas. So it is very important that these international bodies, these international organizations still convene, that they still set standards, that they still coordinate activities in those areas where they can provide certain effective results. But of course, international law, international order is under attack. Multipolarity is here. We must deal with this with renewed, I would say, diplomatic approaches. And as long as these international organizations are not reinstated at the level which would provide more cooperation, more effective solutions, we should maybe change our diplomatic approaches to some extent. Of course, the state diplomacy must remain the core of diplomatic activities in the world, but I do believe that also whole diplomacy approach could be used in a sense. So besides this governmental state diplomacy, there should be diplomacy in the areas of academia, civil society, public sector, private sector as well, and all other spheres of society where we can influence the world, the states, to change their present course and to go back to more multilateral cooperation, to more respect of the world order, of the international law. I will stop here now and maybe add something later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serra. My next question for Mr. Eger. Mr. Serra just mentioned the importance of rules, diplomacy, multilateral cooperation. Do you believe that regarding the current geopolitical challenges, those rules, diplomacy and multilateral cooperation are still effective or maybe declining or dying?
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for this question, and thank you to the audience that they came to listen to us. I think this is a very important topics that we're going to discuss today. And on your question, to add what Mr. Prime Minister just shared, I think we need to realize, and I think we are realizing it more and more, that we are in a digital era. The reason why I say that, because we have to understand that the digital era brought, I would say, a new phenomenon that we don't realize as much yet. We have the view of experts and scholars, which is great, and I appreciate it, and their voice we must make strong again. On the other hand, as a politician, I always try to look at the way the people think. And with the digital era, what happened, people, through these beautiful small things that everybody owns, are much closer to any topic than before. We used to have mainstream media channels that were the instruments of providing information to the population. Well, now, with these instruments, mainstream media have to fight for their room in shaping the public opinion. Now, what does that mean? What I noticed when especially COVID started, I think people got so much more used to digital instruments of communication, and afterwards, especially in Europe, that affected the whole world through energy crisis when Russia invaded Ukraine, we started to see that since the European response was very strong on supporting Ukraine, Russia realized that the conventional resource or methods of fighting war are not enough. So there was a start of, I would say, hybrid warfare. That's the term I would like to use now. What does it mean? That through these communication channels, through the social platforms where most of the people in the, I would say, around the world, we could say, are now present, any nation, any influencer, any person could get to the minds of millions and millions of citizens of any country, and can start to shape the opinion of that particular public. I, as a Prime Minister, we had to face it and we had to fight for it, but we realized that our government, and I see that most of the governments, are not prepared to face the level of disinformation or information, it's up to you how you call it, to protect the minds of the people. And now what we see, I will add one more thing, that through this digital era, the communication mess that is happening, we are fighting for kind of new mindset that the totalitarian regimes are trying to persuade the rest of the world that they are actually better than the democracies, and that the democracies are kind of over, that they didn't prove themselves as working, which is not true at all. We see an attack on the multilateralism, and we see that this is not true again. So I think all these democratic regimes, multilateralism organization, as it was mentioned, must prove and step into much more effective communication, realizing that if you say something, it doesn't mean that it's received. You have to make sure that your message is heard and is understood. And this is where people who are now, I would say, on the sector of populism, I would say. So they are much more effective and efficient in the communication, and we have to catch up. And we have to understand that this is the next decade. We will have to get used to this new era that is called digital era, and also prepare our citizens to understand what kind of crisis we are. But it's not actually a crisis, it's kind of a transition to a new world. So we have to adapt to it, just like we had to adapt when COVID came. It took us several years to create the immunity. So the digital era is a new world order, I would say, that is going to shape our minds and our way how we approach things. So this is where I would like to point out your thinking going forward, and changing and replacing the old methods for the new methods, but keeping the principles, because the principles of democracy, of human rights, of rule of law, these are the principles that can actually bring a safe world and a peaceful world. We cannot throw them away anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Reger. I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to go back to the very important point you've made about the challenging that the world, and especially democracy, may be facing in this new digital era you've just mentioned. But first, my third question pour Monsieur Flao, sur la question de la guerre en Ukraine. On va revenir peut-être sur un sujet qui préoccupe beaucoup les Européens depuis bientôt 4 ans et peut-être encore plus au cours des derniers jours. Selon vous, ce retour de la guerre à grande échelle sur le continent européen serait-il le prélude d'une nouvelle guerre froide entre grandes puissances qui ne serait pas nécessairement si froide que ça, cette guerre entre grandes puissances?
Merci pour votre question. Merci aussi pour l'invitation. C'est vrai qu'on parle beaucoup de guerre. On parle de guerre en Europe en permanence, dans nos pays. On investit, on achète, souvent américain d'ailleurs, et on dépense énormément au détriment d'autres dépenses sociales, de sécurité, de santé, d'éducation. Et donc, nous subissons quelque part cette guerre à l'est du continent européen, dans un contexte où, vous l'avez dit tout à l'heure, les organisations internationales, à commencer par l'ONU, sont totalement discréditées. Les actes sont posés, mais c'est comme si on ne faisait rien du tout. M. Netanyahou continue sa guerre, M. Kagame continue sa guerre, et ailleurs, M. Poutine continue aussi. Nous subissons donc cela en observateurs impuissants de ce qui devrait être la règle d'or, le respect du droit international. À côté de ça, l'Europe. Oui, l'Europe est obsédée aujourd'hui par la guerre en Ukraine, au point de minimiser, d'ignorer ou d'affaiblir, d'être distrait de ce qui se passe entre Israël et la Palestine, entre Israël et le Liban, entre Israël et la Syrie, Israël voit partout des terroristes pour justifier des attaques et pour justifier des assassinats, et ça se fait dans l'impunité la plus totale, sauf de grands discours, de grandes réunions, de grandes condamnations sans suite. Et au niveau européen aussi, on devait parler beaucoup d'Afrique, mais on n'en parle pas beaucoup de ce qui se passe au Soudan. On ignore aussi ce qui se passe depuis 30 ans à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo. Il y a une impunité, une impuissance de la communauté internationale à faire respecter l'ordre international. À tel point qu'au niveau des Nations Unies, l'Afrique n'est même pas représentée au Conseil de sécurité. On les laisse 2 places comme ça, mais vous écoutez, vous ne dites rien, on reviendra par la suite. L'Europe est divisée. L'Europe est très divisée parce que finalement, chaque pays européen a ses préoccupations en fonction de la proximité, soit avec la Méditerranée, et là c'est l'immigration qui pose problème, soit aussi à l'Est, et c'est l'Ukraine qui pose problème. L'Europe de la défense, on l'a défendue. Elle n'existe pas. En 1999, avec M. Solana, on défendait cette idée. Mais finalement, les désaccords entre la France et l'Allemagne, entre d'autres sensibilités, ont fait que l'Europe de la défense n'existe pas. Aujourd'hui, Mme van der Leyen ne parle même pas de l'Afrique dans son discours sur l'état de l'Union. La haute représentante en politique intérieure n'existe pas. Le président du Conseil est insignifiant et la présidente du Parlement, on n'en parle pas non plus. Ça, c'est la situation aujourd'hui. Et l'Afrique aussi est divisée, selon que l'on se trouve dans cette région-ci, que l'on se trouve au Sahel, que l'on se trouve au centre, qu'on se trouve au sud. Et donc, que peut-on faire là-dessus? Si on veut effectivement éviter les guerres, il faut d'abord parler plus de paix que de guerre. Et faire en sorte aussi que le dialogue revienne à la surface, que les gens se parlent, que la diplomatie sorte des conclaves, des hauts sommets, etc., et qu'il y ait une détermination à recréer un dialogue en commençant par du bilatéral. Et un dialogue désintéressé aussi. Parce que les interventions des États-Unis, elles sont dictées par des intérêts commerciaux et financiers, avant les intérêts de la population. La France a aussi un rôle particulier. Le président français a une volonté d'exister encore à l'extérieur, parce qu'à l'intérieur, il a quand même quelques problèmes à rencontrer. L'Europe se dote beaucoup de gouvernements d'extrême droite aujourd'hui, et quelqu'un a parlé tout à l'heure du populisme. C'est ça, la règle, qui s'appuie aussi sur le rejet de l'autre. L'Europe se ferme. L'Europe redevient une forteresse. L'Europe refuse la migration. L'Europe refuse de rouvrir ses frontières pour des formations des militaires et d'autres. Alors qu'est-ce qui se passe? Les gens vont se former ailleurs. Les jeunes vont se former ailleurs, aux États-Unis ou encore en d'autres pays. Et dans ce concert international, il est clair que ce sont les intérêts des grandes puissances, mais essentiellement la grande puissance américaine qui joue. Parce que si vous observez bien, les Chinois parlent très peu, mais ils agissent. Ils sont zen, ils ont le temps pour eux, et effectivement, ils agissent là en tenant compte aussi, parce que heureusement, les pays africains commencent à se faire respecter par les Chinois aussi, en imposant par exemple la formation des personnes lorsque des entreprises s'installent. Je crois que c'est cette voie-là qu'il faut privilégier aujourd'hui. Mais il faut absolument sortir de cette logique de faire peur aux gens. Il y a quelques semaines, il y a quelques jours, dans mon pays, on voyait des drones partout. Et puis un ministre de la Défense, un successeur, a décidé d'acheter pour 50 millions de drones. Depuis qu'on a décidé d'acheter pour 50 millions de drones, on ne voit plus de drones. Alors vous tirez les conclusions que vous voulez, mais quelque part, j'ai vécu en tant que ministre de la Défense à l'OTAN, j'étais un de ceux qui a refusé de faire participer la Belgique à la guerre en Irak, c'est-à-dire avoir le courage de dire non, avoir le courage de se faire respecter et avoir aussi le courage de dénoncer certains mensonges. J'ai vu les petits flacons de Colin Powell circuler. J'ai vu les images au Koweït où la femme de l'ambassadeur ou la fille de l'ambassadeur disait qu'il y avait des couveuses dans lesquelles les enfants mouraient. Tout ça, la stratégie du mensonge, elle revient aujourd'hui. Alors si nous voulons changer les choses, nous devons absolument être déterminés à parler plus de paix que de guerre, à investir dans l'éducation et la formation, à faire en sorte d'ouvrir les portes de l'Europe, de rencontrer les personnes, de discuter avec ces personnes pour construire, avec la jeunesse qui ne demande que ça. Nous n'avons pas, quand j'entends un chef d'état-major français parler qu'il faut préparer la population à ce que nos enfants meurent pour la patrie, désolé, c'est un langage totalement dépassé, un langage militaire qui est contraire à ce que nous devons faire pour avoir un monde en paix où on pourra, sur base bilatérale, recréer des axes solides nord-sud et sud-nord entre l'Europe et l'Afrique, plutôt que de subir quelque part, parce que si demain il y a une guerre en Ukraine, s'il y a une paix entre la Russie et l'Ukraine, on verra, il faut le souhaiter. Finalement, ceux qui seront perdants, ce seront les Européens, parce qu'on dira, vous devez aller reconstruire maintenant, c'est votre territoire, acceptez l'Ukraine dans l'Union européenne, débrouillez-vous pour consacrer les dépenses suffisantes pour reconstruire, et là, on sera perdant sur tous les coups, parce qu'on a été absent sur la scène internationale aujourd'hui. Donc le dialogue, refaire des liens très forts, basés sur le bilatéral, pour réussir le multilatéral, reconstruire ou renforcer l'ONU, mais surtout s'abstenir de construire ou d'imaginer à nouveau de cénacles, de forums qui organisent beaucoup de réunions internationales très coûteuses pour avoir des photos très intéressantes et qui finalement ne débouchent pas sur des solutions concrètes parce qu'il n'y a pas de dialogue, il n'y a pas d'honnêteté, pas de respect, pas de franchise. Et voilà, c'est ce que je tenais à vous dire très librement comme vous avez pu le constater. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Flao, pour ce propos très libre, en effet, et très important et très stimulant. Mr. Moussa, my next question will be for you. Just a few minutes ago, Mr. Flao started his intervention by mentioning that today the international organizations are discredited. As a former Secretary General of the Arab League, do you think that these international organizations, be they global or regional, can adapt to tackle the current geopolitical challenges? Or maybe are they doomed to fail again and again and to stay discredited, as Mr. Flao said earlier?
Well, thank you very much for this very important question. Thank you. I must start by thanking our hosts for inviting me to resume my membership of this organization and participating in the rich debates about the future of international system. Indeed, the system is under reconsideration because of the failures attributed to it. In my opinion, the multilateral system did not fail. What failed is the architecture of security in the Security Council because of reasons, we all agree that they were not really conducive to let the Council assume its role in maintaining international peace and security. If we go to analyze the role of the specialized agencies or funds or programs, we will find a lot of success stories. And the so-called third world has enjoyed a lot of the help coming through the specialized agencies, programs, help, etc. But what failed, as I said, is the architecture of peace and security because of the role of big powers based on policy of double standard and also the veto and the misuse of the veto. We should not fall into the trap created for so many people to say that the system has fallen and we have to find another system. This is a very dangerous trend. We cannot build another system, seeing what is going on the international scene and the role of the big powers and their, in fact, opposing interests, and they have not yet created a theory on how to deal with the future of international relations and the future of the world. Therefore, let us call for a reconsideration of what is being said, what is being for the world to be told that the system has failed. I believe that we have to stress the point, no, it has not failed. It needs renovation, rehabilitation, of course, but failure as 0%, and we have to rebuild from scratch. This is a very negative theory that will cost us a lot and might take the whole world into an era of chaos. That's number one. Number two, the issue of international peace and security. Observing and following how the Security Council is dealing with the several situations that are there. A big power can veto the policy or the resolutions of another big power. We in the Middle East have suffered a lot from the misuse of the veto power and the way big powers dealt with the international law, to the extent that the international law now is being put on the shelf. It does not apply. I heard a high official from a big power talking about the Geneva Conventions as something of the past, while Geneva Conventions of 1949 are dealing with serious situations of war and that produces prisoners of war and produces occupation and how to deal with the population in the occupied territories. We suffered a lot from the failure of the Security Council, and I believe the word failure of the Security Council is not really accurate, but of the attitude of big powers and the rivalry between them. We paid a very serious price that enabled certain powers to impose their policy, their demands, their interests, which has produced, in our case, it has produced the events of 7th of October 2023. They did not come just like that by chance, or people were running after each other, shooting at each other as if they are the cowboys in the Middle East. There were reasons for that. And the main reason was the occupation of the territories of the Palestinian lands in Gaza, in the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. This is an issue that we can discuss in the afternoon because there is another session that we shall discuss that issue. But the point I'm trying to make is that we have to call a spade, but we have also to be fair when we talk about the international system. And the system needs renovation, no question. And when we read the recent documents produced by the United Nations, especially the document for the future that have been adopted last year, there are a lot of things that if we look at them and cooperate, all of us, in order to make them succeed, I believe we have a chance. But if we can't stand vis-a-vis the negative stance taken by several big powers, I believe we will be swept, and the whole system will be swept away. I believe that we have to consider how to renovate the system. We talked about that, but I see no working group, at least, in the United Nations, starting to consider, okay, now, what can we do? And where exactly should we start? Should we start by investigating the capacity of the specialized agencies, or concentrate on the Security Council in particular, or go to the International Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization? We have to decide. And until now, it is only talk. We talk about that, but I don't see one single step that has been special, but except just to be accurate, except the debate and the document of the what is it's called for the future, the for the future. This is the only thing, the only document that has been adopted. So I seize the opportunity of having the floor in such a panel, in front of such audience, to underline the issue that no, the system has not failed. The security system has failed because of reasons, and we have to talk frankly about that. The double standard, the interests of big powers, and so on. If there is something that this meeting will produce, we have to underline that in order to be practical, to add to the discussion or the international debate on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Musa. My next question will be for Mr. Razaev. In a context of renewed great powers rivalries and doubts about the efficiency of international institutions, what role can regional powers play to defend their interest first and then maybe help build bridges between rivals?
Thank you, sir. It is a pleasure and privilege to be in such a good company this morning. I'm glad to report that against the general background of tragic, dramatic, pessimistic, and sad news and impressions from around the world, we in the South Caucasus are now producing more and more good news every day. So we can be considered a source of cautious, but still strong optimism. It didn't appear just overnight. We've covered a long way towards this, and we've been the victims of injustice, neglect, and manipulation for almost 30 years, right? So we learned the hard way that the system is not broken, it was built this way, right? And distinguished speaker mentioned that a certain official was ignoring or downplaying the importance of the Geneva Convention. Well, to share an episode from my junior diplomatic career from some 20 years ago, Azerbaijan was always referring to the importance of the Helsinki Final Act as an important international document which stressed the prevalence of such principles as territorial integrity and sovereignty. And one European official, from a very distinguished country, approached me and said that you, young man, should forget about the Helsinki Final Act because it's an old and obsolete document from the Brezhnev era. To which, as puzzled and astonished I was, to which I can only reply that, what about the UN Charter? Shall we forget about that? Because that document is actually from Stalin's era, right? And yet, interestingly, documents such as UN Charter and Helsinki Final Act have suddenly become very popular in Europe, since 2022. Surprise, surprise, right? We in Azerbaijan have been facing, from day one of our independence, have been facing the situation of foreign aggression, invasion, occupation, ethnic cleansing, and the world just didn't care. The 4 UN Security Council resolutions, numerous other documents and resolutions adopted by other international organizations were ignored and neglected. They just remained on paper. Facts of occupation, facts of creating basically colonizing regimes and illegal settlements in other conflict situations were criticized, but they were never mentioned when it came to Azerbaijan. The importance of other countries' territorial integrity and sovereignty was always put in the first place, but when it came to Azerbaijan and what was known as Karabakh conflict, we only heard calls for compromise, for finding a middle way. Compromise at the expense of our territorial integrity. Thank you, but no thank you. So we did what we did. When we realized that nobody is going to come to the region to restore international law and justice, we did it by ourselves on a very strong basis, again, of international law and justice. We restored our territorial integrity and sovereignty. We put an end to occupation and illegal separatist regime. And with the help of international partners, led by new US administration and President Trump personally, we managed to transform the regional situation in the South Caucasus between Azerbaijan and Armenia. We initialed the peace treaty. We declared the commitment of the two countries to finding peaceful solutions to the disputes. Just yesterday, for the first time in many years, the Bilateral Border Delimitation Commission met for the first time in Azerbaijan, in the city deep inside Azerbaijan, not at the border and not in a third country. There have been exchange of visits on track 2 between researchers. There is a very active discussion on practical modalities and arrangements of reopening transit and connectivity communications between the two countries. But again, this is not happening in vacuum. And this is not just happening because one country, which used to occupy our territory, suddenly found, saw the light. Not at all. We had to use force in order to restore domination of international law in our region. And now we are building peace and pursuing normalization on this foundation, just like was the case in Europe after World War II. Because France and Germany, Germany and Poland, Italy and Austria, and other countries, they did not become friends overnight. 2 world wars had to be fought, and a lot of people, regretfully, had to lose lives for other people to understand that the only alternative to this is international law, mutual respect, mutual recognition of territorial integrity, sovereignty, and inviolability of international borders. This is the best alternative to the chaos and to the jungle which we regretfully see in many situations across the world. So there is light, there is optimism, there is a way out of it. We just need to go back to the sources, go back to the roots. The humankind actually passed through a very similar sets of situations already in 20th century. We need to rediscover the bicycle, so to speak. The importance of regional alliances is very relevant and actually rising, since peoples and countries and communities are realizing that the global organizations, universal organizations, are paralyzed or stuck. So there is a need for regional solutions, right? There is a need for regional approaches, since people on the ground know situation better. They know the background, they know histories, they know the root causes of many situations, right? So to delegate or outsource finding solutions to some outside powers or organizations is not exactly and not always working. And again, this is something we learned hard way in Azerbaijan and in the Caucasus in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Razaev. My next question will be for you, Mr. Kavak. Earlier, Mr. Eger mentioned that we entered a new digital era, and that this era comes with major challenges, like how we address transnational issues, how political leaders can reach their population and convince them that their goals, their policies maybe are legitimate. How do you think that the international community can address the challenges of this digital era? Is it prepared, organized to do so, or is there still a lot of catch-up to do to be up to this task of adapting to this new era?
Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. C'est un plaisir, un honneur d'être ici à Tangier et de discuter avec ces personnalités éminentes de ces sujets d'importance globale. But I will answer in English. I think, unfortunately, I'm convinced, unfortunately, that it is not the so-called international community that can solve or find the answers to the challenge of digitalization. First of all, when we see what is going on today, it is the result of structural problems in the US. The rise of China is linked, is in correlation with structural changes in the US. In 5 years, China will represent 45% of the world's production, according to a report published by the United Nations Industry Development Organization in Vienna, based in Vienna. Okay, so things are changing, and the fight between the U.S. and China, the only power that can put the U.S. in danger is China, not Russia. Okay, and the confrontation is about artificial intelligence. So the fight will be decided between the US and China. What can we do in Europe? And there I will join the position of Monsieur Flau. We have to be much more self-assertive. We have to put up our own, we have to format our own ideas, and we have to put them forth in a very active manner. So what we have seen thus far when it comes to the European Union is that we have obeyed. We wanted to be very outspoken when it came to the negotiations about foreign trade with the US. We capitulated, the European Union. We wanted to be very active when it comes to information technology and the presence of American companies on the European soil. Once again, we capitulated. So if we continue to capitulate, we will not be important anymore, as it is the case, unfortunately, when it comes to the Palestine issue, when it comes to the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine taking place on European soil, but it's going to be decided in negotiations between the US, Ukraine and Russia. Unfortunately, not by the European Union, although it's a conflict conflict on the European soil. So the conflict or the future of artificial intelligence will be decided by the confrontation between the US and China. And I will quote to conclude a study which was published a year ago. There's a survey, an annual survey, which is published by an Australian institute. It's called ASPI. It's the Strategic Institute in Australia, a government institution funded by the Australian government and also by some international companies, American companies like Microsoft. And they published a study on critical technologies. And they identified 64 areas of competition when it comes to technologies, robotics, and so on and so forth. And according to the Australians, it's not a Croatian study, it's not a Belgian study, it's not a Russian study, it's not an American, it's an Australian study, a study by a neighbor of China. And they say, the Australians, that out of 64 areas, in 57, the Chinese dominate. And only in 7 areas, the Americans dominate. The Europeans are in the top only in some areas. But in none of the areas, there's European domination. This is to answer your question, Mr. Touré. So I'm trying to be optimistic, but I'm a realist. And I think that, and this is also the case for Africa, Africa has to do much more on its own, okay, emancipate itself. And we in Europe, we have to re-emancipate ourselves once again to have a say in these most important matters in the world, particularly in digital technologies. And I will conclude by quoting something Mr. Umberto Eco said before his death. It's in French because it's closer to the Italian language, so it's closer to the spirit of it's a Romance language. And digitalization is interlinked, it's in correlation with democratization, okay? So we all have the right to express ourselves. You cannot forbid someone to say what he thinks, but there's a danger. So Eco said, les réseaux sociaux ont donné le droit de parole à des légions d'imbéciles qui, auparavant, ne faisaient que discuter au bar après un verre de vin sans causer de tort à la collectivité. On les faisait taire tout de suite, alors qu'aujourd'hui, ils ont le même droit de parole qu'un prix Nobel. C'est l'invasion des imbéciles. But you cannot prevent people from expressing themselves, but you need something to make sure that people who are not really qualified, don't have the knowledge on certain issues, cannot have the same impact like someone who's an expert in a certain domain. So me not being a medical doctor, how should I have the right to speak about certain diseases? I'm an historian by qualification, as someone who's a medical doctor. So this is something what Mr. Heger said in Slovakia. So this is something we should do in Europe. We should think about ourselves and try to solve our own problems in a very intelligent manner. And this also implies, of course, to Africa, to look for a solution that are important for Africa. And then think together about the global level. Merci, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kovac. Next question from Mr. Petrecek. Mr. Kovac just mentioned that Europe needs to be more assertive on very important issues. Do you believe that Europe and maybe other regional actors can be more assertive towards issues like new technologies, cyber attacks, climate change, migration, or maybe they are doomed again to follow the lead and be spectators in the rivalries between China and the US, for instance?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'll try to address your tricky question. I think I wouldn't use the word assertive. I think what is at stake is an agency not only of Europeans, but Africans, South Asians, Central Asians, Latin Americans. Because what we see is a new emerging, I would dare to say, digital and technological colonization. Because we are entering the era where one of the global common space, which is the digital space, is increasingly dominated by very few actors, not even state actors in some cases. And they are using the resource which is defining this common space, data. They are collecting our data the same way as colonizers collected natural resources in the past, taking off the agency of people who were living on the soil under which the resources were. Now we are losing a bit of our agency, what we want to do with our data, how our data can contribute to our welfare, to the welfare of our societies. And I think we need to look for new ways how to cooperate internationally, but I would stress also transnationally, to get back the agency, to get back over the control over our data and the way we use it, and allow others to use it. Europe is trying to do something, but I think, as mentioned by Mr. Kovac, Europe needs to partner, team up with others to get over the insufficiencies and lack of capabilities it has right now. And that's where I see a lot of opportunities for international and transnational cooperation with Africa, with Africans, with other people in other parts of the world that are also colonized digitally and technologically by big powers like US and China. And I think we need to get out of the logic of bipolar competition, which is producing, as a side effect, producing this colonization. We need to look at the world not as a kind of like new Cold War between the US and China, which is leaving the only option for us to pick a side, because that's also something where we are losing our agency. And we need to advocate for a world which is multipolar. Actually, I think Europe should not be scared of multipolar world as it is right now, because it can allow us to follow different logic rather than Cold War logic of old-style alliances. We can create new cooperation, new formats for cooperation. I would stress that what we need to address these issues, I think it was said by Miro Serrar, probably selective multilateralism might be the way. I would also stress much more flexible multilateralism is a way forward for us, for people who share the belief that multilateralism is a solution. We can create or co-create closer coalition-based cooperation. But I would like to stress that we need to create it in the framework of existing institutions, to reform them, because I see the danger to create this coalition outside of existing frameworks, because it will only undermine the multilateral institutions we have at the place right now, which needs to reform, which need a reform, but at the same time are not capable of addressing some of the major challenges, as for example the geopolitics of norms, rules and standards in the digital sphere.
Thank you very much, Mr. Petricek. Ms. Palfalvi, a question for you. Earlier, Mr. Flao painted quite a dark picture of the situation of Europe. Would you say that the Europeans are relevant to tackle current geopolitical challenges, or will they be just spectators or victims of the coming world order reconfiguration?
It's an honor to be the last speaker of this panel, especially when they have such an distinguished guest here. So if I can just respond to one of the previous questions very quickly, as the only Gen Z member of the panel, I do think that obviously digitalization is something that we need to address and we need to talk about. I'm just a bit surprised to see that why are we portraying it as a challenge rather than an opportunity. If you look at the whole world history and human history, new inventions always given us kind of like a changing point and always given us better opportunities to develop ourselves and the whole society. You know, we can mention literally from the Roman Empire to Industrial Revolution, anything that you want. But to circle back to the Europe questions, I very much agree with a lot of things that were said. First of all, I think it's great to be at a panel discussion and at a conference where people understand that there are different power centers in the 21st century. When we talk with Europeans, in a lot of cases, I feel like we are very much delusional and they are still not understanding that it's not only a bilateral big power competition, there are different power centers emerging in the world, and we need to take that into reality and we need to adapt the European policies in order to reflect that. And then secondly, I see something very common, and now I will only talk about the major powers worldviews. For example, if you look at China, which is, Dongguo, which is the middle power, they have a very, I would say, like center to periphery worldview. Let's look at Russia. They have a very zero-sum game, power game. America with the new Monroe Doctrine, making America great again, is always putting themselves first. And this is something that the European nations, and let's talk about the European Union in this sense, also focus on. We need to make sure that the European Union is competitive. I very much like the self-assertiveness comment that was made previously. We just need to stop being delusional and we need to make Europe competitive again. We were already discussing the fact that, we are just kind of in the middle and trying to balance everything out. And, Hungary is always criticized, or I would say that being portrayed as a problematic member of the European Union for not, I wouldn't say complying because that's not true, that's definitely fake news, but having put the sovereignty of its country first. And the big question is, in order for us as Europeans to be competitive, we need to first figure out ourselves. What type of Europe do we want? And, there are different answers for that. As a Hungarian, we do believe in the strong nation of Europe, not the United States of Europe. And then the second point is that I want to make is, in order for us to be able to be a bit more competitive, we need to engage with everyone. We need to have conversations, we need to have free trade agreements. We cannot look at the political debates from an ideological point of view because that's no longer relevant. That's no longer relevant in the current political order. We need to be diverse, we need to have a la carte diplomacy, and international institutions, we were already discussing that as well, cannot be saying to nations that just because you want to have conversations with different entities, you are not complying with what we are telling you to do. No, every nation is, elected by its people, and if the people are not happy with the foreign policy that they are having, they will change the government in the next elections. So the key question here is, how much do we respect sovereignty? And this is what, the Hungarian foreign policy approach has been doing and trying to do. And the European Union should also be a bit more open to not ideologized foreign policy approaches, but rather to look at what the European Union interest is and to have a strategic autonomy-based foreign policy.
Thank you very much. Maybe before I open the floor to the audience for a Q&A session, I will ask one question to all of our panelists. So in the audience, if you want to ask a question, prepare it. We have about 15 minutes left. I think we have time for a couple of questions. But first, I will ask one. It's the moderator privilege here. And I will use the collective knowledge of our panelists and your capacity to think outside the box, maybe even to predict or imagine the future. In your opinion, let's say in the middle term, which configuration of the international system seems the most likely to you? Some kind of a new Cold War stability, a renewed reform international cooperation, permanent global chaos, or something else? Who wants to be the first to address this question? Mr. Egger.
Thank you. If I may, I would choose B, but my answer would be whatever we make it. Because we can become victims of the decisions of the others, or we can create the future. And I'm a strong fan of creating the future. And here, even in this panel, you could hear how right now it's between China and US. But look at it from a perspective that both of these countries are, I would say, homogeneous communities or basically environments, where European Union, it's a heterogeneous, because we are, as it was called, we are nations living together and trying to find a unity, not uniformity. And that's what I saw during the COVID and the energy crisis. 27 countries, parliaments, governments had to find a quick decision on very challenging and new topics. It was such a stress, but we could do it. Sometimes we were able to decide within hours or days. 27 parliaments, 27 governments. But it's possible, and therefore we could be a new role model, even from the perspective of midterm, definitely from long term, but for midterm, and also for Africa and other continents, where we can show that even nations of their own identities, different identities, can agree on important issues and lead in those issues and be a role model for the topic. So that's why the need of European Union to become one of the leaders, together with partnering with Africa and other parts of the world, can bring between China and United States a great partner that will have different style, but it's going to be a style where it builds on the principles that are proven as multilateralism and others that were shared here, respecting international law. And that's the future forward. That's what I would promote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Egger. Mr. Serra, you want to add?
I just want to continue here because I do strongly believe as well that Europe must become more competitive, more assertive, especially more united in this area of international relations, etc. But it must also preserve its identity, which means democracy, rule of law, freedoms within the European Union, especially like 4 freedoms, and last but not least, human rights, of course. Because it took us a long way to come to this point where we could open our borders, being sovereign state, but still with open borders, with 4 freedoms, with all kinds of cooperation, collaboration. And this could really be a role model for the future, because, you know, China and the United States, they represent different political models. China, mostly authoritarian, while the United States, of course, is still a democracy, although threatened by this authoritarian model by the incumbent president. But of course, this is much different from European model, from our culture. And I think that Europe and Africa and all other parts of the world should promote themselves as a value-based society who can show which are the best value models to create a better world, which will be definitely more complex than today. I hope that we will re-establish international law for the reasons stated before. And last but not least, besides politics and economy, we have already been, and we will be more and more challenged with a special challenge with no precedent in the history. And this is the hyper-exponential development of artificial intelligence. And this so-called artificial intelligence challenges not only our humane endeavors for a better world, but it also challenges our human nature of society worldwide. So this artificial intelligence, with this hyper-exponential development, will definitely have a big influence on our future relationship, and we must be very careful what to do with it, not to misuse it or abuse it. Otherwise, you know, we will be overpowered by some non-human entities. So this is, I think, one of the biggest challenges besides climate change and wars currently. So I will stop here because there is no time left.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Flao, j'ai l'impression que vous auriez aimé peut-être réagir à ce qui a été dit. Si je me fie au langage
vous êtes
corporel.
un très bon observateur. Je crois qu'effectivement, il faut reconstruire le multilatéralisme, mais il faut, pour le faire, que l'Europe se reconstruise elle-même. Parce que je persiste en disant qu'il y a tellement de différences aujourd'hui que c'est très difficile d'imposer des modèles aux autres. Et quand j'entends que nous sommes un modèle, je ne sais pas quel modèle on peut imposer à une autre partie du monde aujourd'hui. Ce n'est pas nécessairement une référence à un moment où, dans un grand nombre de pays d'Europe, les extrêmes montent en puissance. L'extrême droite est présente dans beaucoup de gouvernements, et cette extrême droite, elle exprime un rejet des autres et elle exprime un repli de l'Europe sur elle-même. Alors, il faut inverser le processus et donc faire en sorte que nous puissions être acteurs. Ça implique aussi qu'il y ait une reprise de confiance dans les idéaux européens qui ont servi de base à la construction de cette Europe, mais aussi avec la volonté de ne pas imposer des modèles à d'autres. On peut travailler avec d'autres en les respectant, en étant partenaires, en entendant leurs besoins, en respectant leur religion, en respectant leur culture, en respectant la couleur de leur peau, et ne pas vouloir imposer ce que nous voulons imposer aux autres. Non, ça nous ne pouvons pas faire parce que nous allons nous condamner à ne pas réussir. Et l'autre élément, on a parlé beaucoup d'Europe, on a parlé beaucoup de Russie, on a parlé beaucoup de Chine, etc. On a dit que c'est un système autoritaire en Chine, une démocratie aux États-Unis, pour l'instant, ça pose des problèmes. Aussi, on parle de démocratie en Israël, ça pose aussi des problèmes d'appréciation, à chacun ses... Nous pouvons effectivement, en ayant le dialogue et la confiance, nous pouvons jouer un rôle à condition d'être modeste dans notre approche et de ne pas être conquérant. Nous n'avons pas la puissance pour le faire.
Merci beaucoup pour ces paroles empreintes de sagesse, Monsieur Flao. Mr. Musa, you wanted to add something to this?
Thank you very much. I'm really amazed that the call for assertiveness, make America great again, make Europe great again. So I must say that the Arab world had to assert itself and say, make the Arab world big and important again. But this will have a certain result that all geographical areas, countries, old countries, new countries, etc., every one of them will insist on make myself, my country, my culture great again. This is an important and very interesting phenomenon in the new international way of thinking. So if you assert your country has to be great again, and I insist that my country should do so, and everyone will say so, look at the chaos that the whole world would. You know why? Because we accepted and looked the other way when big countries put the international law on the shelf. The international law and the Charter of the UN have indeed given us, all of us, big and small, the opportunity to grow and to be assertive in a positive way. This phenomenon is a very serious thing, and I would suggest to the organizer of this conference and others to put this issue, the assertiveness, the wave of assertiveness, individual assertiveness, different societies' assertiveness will lead definitely to confrontation. The confrontation is not between China and US only. It will grow. The South, for example, now, talking about the aspirations to get rich, peaceful, to get back your occupied territories, not to fall into racism and religious intolerance, etc., all the evils that have been imposed on us. That should make us talk about, yes, indeed, if America says we will make America great again, what about us? Why don't we insist on that too? Let us, all of us, be great again. But to be great again, we have to be honest. We cannot call a spade something else, or look the other way when atrocities are being committed in a certain area or a certain geographical area, continent, or as we witness that in what is going on, what went on in Gaza and is going on until now in the territories of Palestine. So the issue of, the assertiveness, it has to be assertiveness within the realm of international law, within the realm of the Charter of the UN, within the realm of the rules that have been drafted in order to take care of or to lead us for a better world. So we have to stress that. It's not a question of assertiveness, full stop, or let this country be great again, full stop. We have to consider that from a different point. How can we do it, all of us, in order to create a new world? And the new world is being created now, with us or without us. And we'll see that. Now we are not talking only about the problems on Earth, the outer space, and the deep outer space, and the deeper outer space, and the deepest outer space. Why? To bring the minerals and the riches. How are we going to distribute them? Where is our role? Your country's role, my country's role, etc. That raised a very big question, the issue of assertiveness. Europe and the European representative here in this panel talked about Europe and Africa. I believe this has to be put before us in a smart way. As Europe says, Europe must assert its role and its not only historical future role, the Africans have to do that too. On their own, they might not need your advice. Let them grow. Let them decide for themselves, exactly as us also in the Middle East. I belong to Africa and the Middle East and the Mediterranean at the same time. But this thing is important. Africa is capable of taking the future in their hands. And sometimes one thinks that we should tell those who talk about the future, hands off Africa. Africa will grow. They do not need a superior telling them what to do and what not to do. That applies to the Arab world. We are ready and capable of asserting our presence, and you will see the problems that have been created in the Arab world, especially after the creation of the State of Israel, and the chaos that has been created without prospects, real prospects for peace. This situation cannot continue. And assertiveness, the way we see from Israel and other countries, is a case for more chaos and more dangerous to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Musa. Mr. Petříček, I've noticed that you wanted to add something, and it maybe will be the last word of our session, since we have about a minute left. Oh, you will have the last word, Mr. Kovac.
I will just follow up on my previous speaker, because I'm afraid if everybody would like to be great again, I think we will be forced to learn a little bit more about Otto von Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck was a mastermind of so-called concert of powers, which unfortunately ended up in World War I, if not managed well. So I would be cautious about calling for greatness, but I wanted to add that we are speaking about the new lines of fracture, and we have been speaking mostly about the fractures between the nations. But I think what we see also that there are emerging fractures within our nations, across our nations, across distributional issues, across among somewheres, anywheres, have-nots, and this will be more and more relevant because new technologies will make these fractures within our societies even bigger. At the same time, I think we can expect that digital technologies, new communication technologies, can also help us to start organize not only within our nations but transnationally. You asked for which kind of model we might expect. I think on one hand we might see that multipolarity can lead to a new concert of powers, big powers. On the other hand, there will be more and more effort to organize transnationally across global civil society, which makes me hopeful that we will not see US, Russia, Europe, China, Arab world great again, but maybe we should call for humanity to be great for the first time. And this is only if we organize across nations.
Thank you very much. It seems that our panelists all want to add something, so I will give them last word. First, Mr. Kovac, then Mr. Ravzaev, and the last word for Ms. Balfalvi.
Thank you. I'll be brief and assertive because I've just looked up in the English dictionary, so it's the Cambridge Dictionary. Assertive means someone who is assertive, behaves confidently, and is not frightened to say what they want or believe. So I'm not frightened to say what I believe. And Europe should not be frightened to say what it believes. But, and once again to stress what Mr. Flowers says, things have changed, things are changing. We have to start being more realistic. We should take care of what is going on in Europe. We cannot impose, as we did it in the past, our model on the rest of the world. We have to take care of our territory and try to see what we can do in the world. The world is changing, inevitably changing. The Americans, this is how I see things to answer your question assertively, will not be able to stop the Chinese from becoming a hegemon in Southeast Asia. If that happens, when that happens, things will be different. We will have two competing orders. Now we have one strong Western order, political order. We have an international order still valid, respected from time to time, international law. And we have an emerging order, which is the order which is being opposed by the Chinese and the Russians and the others. And if the Chinese become a hegemon in Southeast Asia, then there will be a recession of the influence of the Western world, and that's why we should, as Mr. Borrell, who was criticized for what he said, but I think he was positive. He wasn't. It was not meant by him to discriminate someone. We should cultivate our own jardin, our garden, European garden, in a smart manner, and to uphold our standard of living, our European quality of life, and stop imposing our way of life on other regions of the world, and doing it in a very nice and assertive manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kovac. Mr. Razaev.
Thank you. 2 points. First of all, love the way our dear European colleagues managed to steer the discussion into Europe and European Union, although the title of our session doesn't mean either of those words. Second, on artificial intelligence, since it was spoken a lot during this session, little joke. 2 CEOs of international corporations meet in the corridors of the World Economic Forum at Davos, and one asking another, did you start using artificial intelligence in your company? And said, come on, man, we didn't even start using the natural one.
Thank you very much.
I already answered the question, but just to reiterate, we need an international system that is self-assertive, that is pragmatic, and it respects every nation's strategic autonomy.
Thank you very much. Je pense qu'on aurait pu continuer pour à peu près 1h30 encore avec des panélistes aussi bien réchauffés. Malheureusement, c'est déjà tout le temps que nous avions. On a même un petit peu dépassé. Donc, je vous invite à vous joindre à moi pour remercier chaleureusement nos panélistes pour les idées qu'ils ont partagées avec nous, leur énergie. Sur ce, je vous souhaite une bonne fin de MEDays 2025 et une bonne après-midi. Merci. Merci.